Fleet Commander Dravik stood on the observation deck of the Tozaran flagship Inevitable Conquest, with his forearms clasped behind his back as he gazed down at the blue-green pearl that was Earth. His scaled lips curled into what passed for a smile among his species. The sight of human cities burning across the night-side hemisphere sent a particular thrill through his dorsal spines. "Magnificent, isn't it?" he remarked to no one in particular, though the bridge crew all nodded in agreement. 3 weeks. Just 3 weeks to bring these primitives to their knees. The Supreme Overlord predicted 6, at minimum. Lieutenant Mavis approached with a data tablet, her movements precise and efficient. Unlike her commander, she didn't share in the celebratory mood that permeated the bridge. "Sir, the latest occupation reports," she said, handing him the device. "We've established control centers in all major population hubs as planned." Dravik barely glanced at the information. "Excellent. You know, Mavis, I was skeptical when intelligence first suggested targeting this backwater planet. But the mineral deposits alone will fuel our expansion for decades. Not to mention the strategic position for our planned offensive against the Kentorian alliance." He gestured dramatically toward Earth. "And look how easily they fell. All that posturing and noise they broadcast into space. We come in peace, then we will defend ourselves, and finally we surrender unconditionally. Pathetic." Mavis cleared her throat, a habit she'd picked up from studying human communication patterns. "With respect, Commander, our victory was largely due to technological superiority, not tactical brilliance. Human weapons, while primitive, showed remarkable innovation given their limited resources." Dravik waved dismissively with his lower left arm. "Spare me your academic analysis, Lieutenant. Their fusion bombs barely scratched our shields. Their fighter craft couldn't even breach our atmosphere without being vaporized. Their ground forces scattered like, what's that human expression? Ah, yes, like headless poultry." He turned to the tactical display showing the ongoing occupation efforts. Red indicators represented Tozaran control points, spreading across continents like a virus consuming a cell. The few remaining blue dots of human resistance were blinking out, one by one. "The Supreme Overlord will be most pleased," Dravik continued, practically purring with satisfaction. "The humans have valuable resources, and once properly subdued, they'll make adequately productive slave labor for our mining operations." A communications officer interrupted. "Commander, we're receiving the formal surrender transmission from the Human Coalition government. They're requesting terms." "Put it on screen." The main view screen flickered to life, showing a haggard human female in what Dravik recognized as their formal military attire. Her face was smudged with soot, and a bandage covered one eye. "This is General Amanda Blackwell of the United Earth Defense Force. We acknowledge your superior firepower and tactical advantage. To prevent further civilian casualties, we formally surrender all military assets and governmental authority to the Tozaran Empire, effective immediately." Dravik couldn't contain his delight. "General Blackwell, how gracious of you to finally see reason. Your cooperation will be noted when we establish the new labor hierarchies." The human's uncovered eye seemed to flash with something, perhaps anger, perhaps something else, but it was gone so quickly that Dravik dismissed it. "We await your instructions," she said flatly. "Excellent. Maintain your current position. My ground commanders will contact you with occupation protocols." He signaled for the transmission to end. Turning back to the viewport, Dravik allowed himself a moment of pure, unrestrained pride. In just 3 weeks, he had accomplished what many in the Imperial High Command had thought impossible: the complete subjugation of humanity. "Begin landing the occupation forces," he ordered. "I want control established in every settlement with more than 10,000 humans within the next 48 hours. As Mavis coordinated the orders, Dravik continued to stare at Earth, already imagining how it would look once properly developed with Tozaran architecture and mining facilities. He had no way of knowing that the quiet compliance of humanity was merely the calm before a storm unlike anything the Tozaran Empire had ever faced. 3 days into the occupation, Fleet Commander Dravik decided to personally inspect New York City, one of Earth's most populous urban centers. The landing shuttle touched down in what humans had called Central Park, now converted to a Tozaran command post. The lush green space was scarred with landing pads and prefabricated military structures, the trees cleared away for security perimeters. Breathable atmosphere, tolerable gravity, and abundant water, Dravik commented as he stepped onto Earth's soil for the first time. No wonder these creatures multiplied so quickly. Captain Lorvin, the local garrison commander, greeted him with a formal salute. "Welcome to Earth Command Post Alpha, sir. We've established full control over the city grid as ordered." Dravik nodded approvingly. "Show me your progress." As they toured the occupied city in an armored hover transport, Dravik observed the human population moving silently through designated work zones. Military checkpoints controlled all major intersections, and propaganda broadcasts echoed through the canyon-like streets. Tozaran flags hung from skyscrapers, replacing the human symbols of authority. "They're remarkably docile, aren't they?" Dravik mused, watching as a group of humans quietly lined up for identity processing. Intelligence suggested they might be more rebellious. Captain Lorvin gestured toward the armed guards. "The demonstration executions were quite effective, sir. We eliminated 50 resistance fighters in public squares across the city." The message was clearly received. Dravik laughed. Typical primitive psychology. Show them superior force, and they crumble. Lieutenant Mavis, who had accompanied Dravik to the surface, frowned slightly. "Sir, I've been reviewing human historical records. Their acceptance seems inconsistent with past behavior patterns. During previous conflicts among their own kind, they've shown remarkable resilience even in hopeless situations." "That was against other humans, Lieutenant." Dravik dismissed her concern with a flick of his upper right hand. "They've never faced a truly superior species before. The difference is psychological." As they passed a work detail clearing rubble from a damaged building, Dravik noticed something odd. The humans were certainly working, but there was something about their demeanor. Though they kept their heads down, their movements lacked the defeated sluggishness he'd observed on other conquered worlds. One human female caught his eye. As she lifted a piece of concrete, her gaze momentarily met his, and he could have sworn he saw her lips twitch into a brief, knowing smile before she quickly looked away. "Stop the transport," Dravik ordered suddenly. He approached the work detail, his towering 3-meter frame casting a shadow over the humans. "You there, female. Step forward." The woman complied, her face now a perfect mask of submission. "Yes, Lord," she asked, eyes downcast. "You find something amusing about your situation?" Dravik demanded. "No, Lord. I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve the glorious Tozaran Empire." Her tone was perfect deferential, flat, defeated, but something about it struck Dravik as practiced rather than genuine. Before he could pursue this thought, Captain Lorvin approached urgently. "Sir, we have a situation requiring your attention." Back in the transport, Lorvin brought up a tactical display. "We've lost contact with 3 patrol units in the past 12 hours, all in different rural areas." "Equipment malfunction?" Dravik suggested. "Likely." Each unit reported in normally, then went silent mid-transmission. "The last patrol managed to send this before we lost contact." The audio playback was mostly static, but a Tozaran voice came through clearly bass. "We're tracking unusual movement at these coordinates. Stand by." There was a pause, then "Wait, what is that sound?" "It sounds like beating." The transmission ended in a burst of static. Mavis studied the map with concern. "That's the 5th missing patrol this week, sir. All in different geographical regions, yet the pattern is similar." "Isolated resistance pockets," Dravik declared confidently. Nothing to be concerned about. Perhaps, Mavis said carefully, but I've been analyzing communication patterns among the human prisoners. They exchange glances when they think we're not looking. Some appear to be using subtle hand gestures. I believe they may be communicating in ways our translators can't detect. Dravik snorted dismissively. You give them too much credit, Lieutenant. They're barely past the industrial age. Their most advanced AI couldn't even breach our simplest security protocols. A Tozaran soldier approached with another report. Commander, we've had an unusual development at Detention Center 6. 300 human prisoners are requesting to perform what they call a cultural ritual to honor their captors. What kind of ritual? Dravik asked, suddenly curious. Some form of rhythmic movement accompanied by vocal harmonies. They claim it's a traditional way of showing respect to superior forces. Dravik laughed. See, Lieutenant? They're already adapting to their new reality. Allow it. It might provide some entertainment. He turned to Captain Lorvin. Increase patrols in the problematic rural regions. Crush any resistance you find. Triple the execution quotas. As they returned to the shuttle for the trip back to orbit, Dravik failed to notice the same female worker from earlier watching their departure. Once the shuttle lifted off, she pulled a small device from her pocket and tapped it twice. Miles away, in an underground facility, the first drum began to beat. 2 weeks into the occupation, strange incidents began occurring with increasing frequency. Commander Dravik stared at the report on his desk, his irritation growing with each line he read. 19 grav tanks disabled in a single night? This is unacceptable. Across from him, Chief Engineer Brunok wrung his hands nervously. The damage is puzzling, sir. Someone or something has introduced a crystalline compound into the fuel systems. It wasn't there during evening checks, but by morning, the engines were completely fused. Sabotage, Dravik growled. Obviously sabotage. But how? The maintenance bays are under constant surveillance. We've reviewed the security feeds. Nothing unusual was recorded. Dravik slammed a fist on his desk. Then the surveillance was tampered with. These humans may be primitive, but they're proving annoyingly resourceful. As if on cue, Lieutenant Mavis entered his office with another stack of reports. Her usually immaculate uniform showed signs of strain wrinkled at the edges, a small tear on one sleeve. Sir, we have additional problems. Regional Coordinator Pelvik has disappeared. Dravik's head snapped up. Disappeared? How does a 2-meter-tall Tozaran military governor simply disappear from a heavily guarded compound? That's the third senior official to vanish this week, Mavis continued. All from different command sectors. No signs of struggle, no alarm triggers. They're simply gone. She placed a data pad in front of him. And there's more. Communications network efficiency has dropped 60% in the last 3 days. Our technicians can't find any physical damage to relay stations, but signals are being lost, corrupted, or redirected. Dravik hissed through his teeth, a sign of mounting frustration in Tozaran body language. The humans couldn't possibly have the technical capacity to interfere with our quantum relay system. Perhaps not through technical means, Mavis suggested carefully. But I've been researching human warfare tactics throughout their history. They excel at asymmetric conflict, finding unexpected weaknesses, using the environment, psychological operations. She hesitated before continuing. Sir, I believe we may have miscalculated. Miscalculated what, exactly? Dravik's voice dropped dangerously low. The human surrender. What if it wasn't genuine? What if it was tactical? Dravik barked out a laugh. Tactical? Their major military assets were destroyed. Their governments collapsed. Their technology is centuries behind ours. This is simply the disorganized thrashing of a defeated species. Then explain this, Mavis challenged, projecting a planetary map onto the wall display. Red dots pulsed across every continent. Each dot represents a reported equipment failure, missing patrol, or communications disruption within the last 48 hours. The pattern is too coordinated for random resistance. Dravik studied the map, his confidence wavering slightly before he reinforced it with anger. Increase security protocols, double the guard rotations, triple the human labor quotas as punishment. They'll break soon enough. As Mavis turned to leave, a nervous-looking junior officer appeared at the doorway. "Hey, Commander, sorry to interrupt, but we're getting strange reports from multiple outposts." "What now?" Dravik snapped. It's sound-related, sir. Guard posts near human settlements are reporting unusual rhythmic noises after dark. Some kind of percussion. It starts soft, then grows louder, then stops abruptly when patrols investigate. Mavis frowned. "Percussion? Like beating drums?" "Yes, Lieutenant. The humans call them drums, but we can never locate the source. It seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once." "And why is this worth my attention?" Dravik demanded. The junior officer shuffled uncomfortably. "Because it happens simultaneously, sir, across different continents, always starting at exactly 02:00 hours local time, regardless of time zone." And he hesitated. "Speak freely," Mavis encouraged. "The troops find it unnerving. Some have reported difficulty sleeping. Others claim they hear it even when it's not playing. It's affecting morale." Dravik waved dismissively. Sound-based psychological warfare. Primitive but expected. Issue noise cancellation earpieces to the troops. After the officers left, Dravik found himself alone in his office. Despite his outward confidence, a kernel of doubt had taken root in his mind. He accessed the audio recordings from one of the outposts. The sound that played was simple, a steady, rhythmic beating that gradually increased in tempo and volume. Yet something about it raised the scales on the back of his neck. It wasn't just noise. It felt like a message, a promise, a warning. 1 month into the occupation, Fleet Commander Dravik no longer strutted confidently through the corridors of the inevitable conquest. His scales had lost their luster, and dark circles had formed under his 4 eyes from lack of sleep. The drumming haunted him even here, in orbit, though he knew it was impossible. "Status report," he barked as he entered the command center. A tactical officer brought up a holographic display of Earth. Flashing red indicators covered the surface like a rash. "Sir, we've lost 23 forward operating bases in the last 72 hours. Guerrilla attacks have increased 340% since last week." Dravik snarled, his patience threadbare. How? They have no aircraft, no heavy weapons. Their military leadership is in our detention centers. "Sir," the officer continued nervously, "the attacks follow no predictable pattern. Small units strike quickly and disappear before reinforcements arrive. They're using our own weapons against us now." Another officer approached with a datapad. "Commander, we've intercepted communications suggesting a major resistance headquarters in what humans call Colorado. Ground forces are ready to strike on your command." Finally, a tangible target. "Deploy immediately. I want that base obliterated." 6 hours later, Dravik watched the live feed from assault troops as they breached the suspected headquarters, a complex of bunkers built into a mountainside. His anticipation turned to rage as the camera feeds showed room after room of nothing. "It's completely abandoned, sir," reported the strike team leader. "But it was occupied recently. There's still warm food in their eating area." "That's impossible. We had that location under surveillance for days. There's no way they could have evacuated without being spotted." The team leader paused, then added, "Sir, there's something else. They left a message for you." The camera panned to a wall where large letters had been painted. Thanks for the weapons upgrade, Commander. Drums keeping you up at night? Dravik roared in fury, sweeping equipment from a nearby console with one powerful arm. The bridge crew flinched but remained silent, knowing better than to draw attention. Find them. I want every human resistance fighter publicly executed. I want their families working in the deepest mines until they die of exhaustion. Lieutenant Mavis entered the bridge, her expression grim. Commander, we've captured a human resistance operative attempting to sabotage the main power relay in Sydney. Finally, something going right. Bring them to me. The prisoner was a middle-aged human male, unremarkable in appearance except for his complete lack of fear. Despite obvious injuries from his capture, he stood straight-backed before Dravik, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You find your situation amusing, human? Human? Dravik loomed over him threateningly. The man shrugged. Kinda, yeah. Dravik fought to control his temper. You will tell me the resistance command structure, locations of your bases, and your methods of communication. Or what? You'll kill me. The prisoner chuckled. That's your first big mistake, you know. You Tozarans, you're so afraid of dying. Humans? We've been romanticizing noble deaths for thousands of years. You'll talk, Dravik growled. Everyone talks eventually. Oh, I'll talk. Happy to chat about the weather, sports, your inevitable defeat. Dravik backhanded the human, sending him sprawling. To his astonishment, the prisoner started laughing from the floor, blood trickling from his split lip. Know what your second mistake was. The human climbed slowly back to his feet. You broadcast your surrender demands on every frequency. Gave us time to prepare. Prepare for what? Your military was crushed. The prisoner's smile widened. Our standing military, sure. But you never bothered to learn about our reservists, our veterans, our hunters, our survivalists. He leaned forward conspiratorially. Ever wonder why so many humans own weapons? We've been preparing for alien invasions in our fiction for centuries. Dravik had the prisoner dragged away to interrogation, but the human's laughter echoed down the corridor. Later that evening, Mavis requested a private meeting with Dravik. She found him in his quarters, staring at surveillance feeds from Earth's surface. What is it, Lieutenant? More bad news? Information, sir. I've been researching human military history more extensively. She activated a holographic display showing ancient human battles, guerrilla campaigns, and resistance movements throughout their history. The Vietnamese tunnels that confounded American forces, the Afghan fighters against multiple superpowers, the French resistance during Nazi occupation. Throughout their history, humans have perfected the art of asymmetric warfare against technologically superior forces. Mavis brought up another display. And this is particularly interesting, their cultural fixation on drums as communication and psychological warfare tools. African talking drums could relay complex messages over vast distances. Native American war drums instilled fear in enemies. Drums have been used to coordinate attacks, maintain morale, and intimidate opponents across every human culture. Dravik stared at the displays, his confidence crumbling. Why wasn't this in our intelligence briefings? Because we studied their governments, their militaries, their technologies, Mavis replied. We never studied their history. A sudden priority alert interrupted them. Commander, came an urgent voice over the comm system. You need to see this. The main view screen showed a nighttime view of Earth from orbit. Across the dark side of the planet, in perfect synchronization, thousands of fires were being lit, forming a pattern visible from space. The pattern of a drum. 5 weeks into what was now being called the apparent victory, Dravik found himself in the Central Command bunker in what had once been Berlin. The flagship was too vulnerable. In orbit, 3 Tozaran support vessels had been mysteriously disabled in the past week, so he had relocated his command center to Earth's surface, surrounded by the heaviest defenses the Empire could deploy. status of the Tokyo garrison?" he demanded, hunched over the war table. A communications officer looked up with dread. "Still no contact, sir. Last transmission indicated they were under heavy assault from multiple directions. Then nothing." Dravik ground his teeth. "How are they coordinating these attacks? We've destroyed—" No one ventured an answer. No one had answers anymore. The command bunker was 20 levels below ground, surrounded by energy shields and automated defense systems. 3 concentric rings of troops protected the approach. It was supposed to be impregnable. The first explosion took out the primary power grid. The second collapsed the northern access tunnel. The third impossibly breached level 15. "We're under attack," shouted the security chief. "Multiple penetration points. They're inside the perimeter." Alarms wailed as emergency lighting bathed the command center in blood red. Dravik drew his sidearm. "How many hostiles?" "Unknown. Sensors are compromised. Weight detecting an approaching vehicle. Large transport, moving at high speed toward the main entrance." On the security feed, Dravik watched in disbelief as a primitive human vehicle, something they called a bus, accelerated toward the bunker entrance. Security turrets fired automatically, riddling the vehicle with energy bolts, but it didn't slow. "It's a suicide attack," he realized too late. The bus, packed with high explosives, detonated at the main entrance. The blast tore through the outer defenses like they were made of paper. Through the smoke came human fighters. Not in uniform, not in formation, not as soldiers were supposed to attack. They came as individuals, each moving differently, using the chaos to their advantage. Some wore parts of Tozaran armor repurposed. Others were in civilian clothing. All moved with deadly purpose. Dravik slammed his fist on the emergency evacuation control. "All personnel, fall back to secondary positions. This facility is compromised." As troops scrambled to evacuate, Lieutenant Mavis appeared at his side, her uniform scorched and torn. "Sir, we need to move. Now." They fought their way through corridors already filling with smoke and the sounds of combat. Twice they encountered human fighters who seemed to melt away into side passages before they could be engaged. "They're not trying to kill us," Mavis observed as they reached the emergency shuttle bay. "They're hurting us." Realization dawned on Dravik's face. The entire attack is a funnel. They halted, suddenly aware they were being manipulated, but unsure of the alternative. Behind them, the sounds of fighting grew louder. "We have no choice," Dravik decided. "Launch the shuttle." As the small craft shot out of the underground hangar and into the night sky, Dravik had a perfect view of what was happening below. The command bunker, pride of Tozaran military engineering, was fully breached. Human fighters swarmed through every level. But they weren't randomly destroying things, they were systematically capturing Tozaran technology, weapons, and data cores. "They're not just fighting back," he whispered. "They're arming themselves. Upgrading." The shuttle's communications system crackled to life with an incoming transmission. To Dravik's shock, the face that appeared was General Amanda Blackwell, the same human who had offered their surrender weeks ago. Her previously bandaged eye was perfectly healthy. The injury had been a deception. "Fleet Commander Dravik," she said, her tone almost conversational. "I trust you're enjoying your tactical retreat." "You deceived us," he snarled. "Your surrender was a lie." Blackwell smiled. "Not a lie. A strategic pause. We needed time to analyze your technology, your tactics, your weaknesses. Thank you for the live demonstration of your capabilities." "You cannot win," Dravik insisted. "Our fleet." "Your fleet is currently engaged with what they believe is an uprising on your home colony of Nexara," she interrupted. "They won't be back for some time. We've learned how to spoof your communications rather effectively." Dravik felt his blood run cold. Impossible. Also, you should know that shuttle's navigation system has been compromised. Don't worry, we've chosen a lovely, remote landing site for you. The transmission cut off as the shuttle's controls locked, sending them on a new course. Mavis looked at Dravik, genuine fear in her eyes for the first time. Sir, listen. As the shuttle flew over the darkened continents below, Dravik heard it through the hull, a sound that started faintly but grew in volume and intensity with each passing second. Rhythmic, purposeful, primal. War drums. Not isolated incidents anymore. Not psychological tricks. Actual drums being beaten by thousands, perhaps millions of humans across the planet's surface. The sound carried through the air, through the ground, through the very metal of their vessel. It's a signal, Mavis said quietly. I've studied their historical records. Drums like these were used before major offensives, to coordinate attacks across vast distances, to communicate in codes enemies couldn't decipher, and what? Dravik demanded. And to tell the enemy exactly how many warriors were coming for them. She swallowed hard. The louder the drums, the larger the army. The sound was deafening now, even inside the shuttle. It wasn't random noise, it had a pattern, a tempo that rose and fell in complex variations. They're counting, Mavis whispered. That's what this rhythm means. They're counting down. As their commandeered shuttle descended toward an unknown fate, Dravik finally understood. The humans hadn't surrendered because they were defeated. They had surrendered because it was the fastest way to victory. The drums grew louder still. The drums stopped. After 48 hours of continuous, thunderous beating that had driven Tozaran troops to the edge of sanity, the sudden silence was somehow worse. Dravik and Mavis had been escorted to a makeshift command post in what humans called Montana, a remote region with vast open spaces and towering mountains. Their guards were not soldiers but ordinary humans, farmers, teachers, mechanics, all armed with modified Tozaran weapons. The quiet is merely tactical, Mavis whispered, like the surrender was. As if triggered by her words, every communication device in their commandeered outpost activated simultaneously. Screens flickered to life, comms units crackled, even ancient human radio equipment suddenly powered on. General Blackwell's face appeared on the main display. Behind her stood a diverse group of humans, military officers from different nations, civilians in work clothes, even children operating complex equipment. "Good morning, Commander Dravik," she said pleasantly. "I thought you might like to watch what happens next." The display split into multiple feeds showing Tozaran positions across the planet. To Dravik's horror, each feed showed the same thing: human forces emerging from seemingly nowhere, from underground tunnels, dense forests, urban sewers, mountain caves, and ocean depths. "This is impossible," Dravik breathed. "Our scanners would have detected these troop concentrations." "Not if they were shielded by natural features we've spent millennia learning to use," Blackwell replied. "Your scanners can't penetrate our deepest cave systems. Your thermal imaging is useless in our geothermal regions. Your motion sensors can't distinguish between humans and the millions of large mammals that roam our wilderness." On the screens, Dravik watched in stunned disbelief as Tozaran positions fell one after another. Not to superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but to the sheer adaptability and ingenuity of human attacks. In the Amazon rainforest, Tozaran troops found their armor overheating and malfunctioning in the humid environment, while humans in light clothing swarmed through the trees above them, striking and vanishing. In Siberia, Tozaran vehicles broke through ice cover that humans had deliberately weakened, plunging into freezing waters, while locals on ice skates and snowmobiles circled like predators. In the Sahara, sandstorms, some natural, some artificially generated, fouled sensitive equipment and blinded Tozaran forces, while desert-adapted human fighters navigated by touch and instinct. "You see," Blackwell continued, almost conversationally, "we've been fighting on this planet for thousands of years. We've adapted to every environment, every terrain. This is our home. We know every advantage it offers. A new report flashed on screen. Tozaran orbital platforms were being sabotaged. Somehow, humans had managed to reach orbit. How? Dravik demanded. You have no functional spacecraft. Blackwell smiled. We didn't. But you helpfully landed thousands of shuttles on our planet. We've been studying them, modifying them. Your automated security systems are actually quite simple once you understand the operating principles. Another screen showed human fighters using Tozaran force shields as mobile cover while they advanced through the ruins of London. In Hong Kong, they had reprogrammed security drones to turn against their Tozaran masters. In Rio de Janeiro, they had somehow adapted Tozaran atmospheric processors to create localized weather effects, lightning storms that precisely targeted Tozaran communication arrays. This was never just a military conquest for us, Blackwell explained. It became a global engineering project. While your troops were busy establishing control of our cities, our scientists, engineers, hackers, and inventors were reverse engineering every piece of technology you dropped on our planet. One by one, the screens showed Tozaran command centers falling, troops surrendering, ships being disabled. Your primary tactical error, continued a new voice. A human male in civilian clothes who stepped into view, was assuming our technological development was linear. You saw our commercial technology and military hardware and judged our capabilities accordingly. This is Professor James Kwan, Blackwell introduced him. He led our reverse engineering efforts. You never considered that our theoretical understanding might be far ahead of our practical implementation, Kwan explained. We had theories about quantum communication, shield technology, and gravitational manipulation. We just lacked the industrial capacity to build them. You gave us working models to study. Dravik slumped in his chair as reports of defeats flooded in from every continent. In just 6 hours, the Tozaran invasion force, the pride of the Empire's military, had been reduced to scattered, isolated pockets of resistance. Lieutenant Mavis, ever analytical, asked the question that Dravik was too shocked to formulate: the drums. What was their purpose? Why maintain that psychological pressure for so long, then stop precisely before your attack? Blackwell smiled. 2 reasons. First, it was indeed psychological warfare wearing down your troops, making them jumpy, sleep-deprived, paranoid. And second, Kwan added, the drums weren't just making noise. The vibrations they created, at specific frequencies, were disrupting the molecular bonds of a compound we discovered in your shield generators, weakening them microscopically, day after day. The final drumbeat, Blackwell concluded, was the signal that the weakening had reached critical threshold. When we stopped drumming and attacked, your shields failed precisely when they needed to hold. On the screens, Dravik watched the last of his orbital command ships list helplessly, its engines dark, as small human-piloted shuttles stolen and modified from his own fleet attached to its hull. We've disabled your long-range communications, Blackwell informed him. The rest of the Tozaran Empire won't know what happened here until it's far too late. Outside the command post, a new sound began, a different drumbeat, slower, more methodical. Not a signal for attack this time, but something else. What now? Dravik asked, his voice hollow. That, Mavis answered, her military training allowing her to recognize the pattern, is a victory cadence. The rhythm spread across valleys and mountains, carried by human voices and instruments. Where before the drums had been threatening, now they held a different emotion: triumph, yes, but also a kind of terrible joy that made Dravik's scales crawl. The war drums have changed their tune, Commander, Blackwell said, her voice now hard as steel. Now they're telling you, and soon, your entire empire, exactly who we are. 3 days after the global counterattack began, Fleet Commander Dravik found himself in the last Tozaran stronghold on Earth, a heavily fortified compound built into the side of a mountain in what humans called New Zealand. Remote, defensible. and still supplied with enough firepower to hold off attackers for weeks. Or so he believed. "Status report," he demanded, pacing the command center like a caged predator. His once pristine uniform hung in tatters, his scales dull with stress. "Not good, sir," replied Commander Dravik, one of his few remaining senior officers. "Humans have surrounded the base on all sides. They've established artillery positions on the neighboring ridges. Our long-range scanners detect unusual energy signatures consistent with our own heavy weapons." "How many troops do they have?" Dravik hesitated. "It's difficult to get an accurate count. They're using terrain features and some kind of localized scrambling field." Another officer spoke up. "Sir, they're broadcasting on all frequencies. They're requesting to send in a negotiator." Dravik snarled. "To discuss our surrender? Never. The Tozaran Empire does not surrender." "Actually, sir," Dravik said carefully, "they're offering us terms. Surprisingly generous ones." Before Dravik could respond, the main view screen activated without command. General Blackwell's face appeared, now wearing a formal military uniform decorated with insignia Dravik didn't recognize. "Commander Dravik," she greeted him with cold professionalism. "Your situation is untenable. You have 342 troops remaining in your compound, with supplies for approximately 2 weeks. We have over 15,000 fighters in position, with air and artillery support." Dravik straightened his posture, dignity intact, despite everything. "We still have enough firepower to cause significant damage before we fall." "True," Blackwell acknowledged, "which is why I'm offering terms. Your troops will be allowed safe passage off-planet with basic supplies and 1 operational vessel. In exchange, you will provide technical documentation on your FTL drive systems and weapons specifications." "And why would I agree to this?" Dravik sneered. "Why not fight to the last Tozaran?" "Because," came a familiar voice from off-screen, "that would be strategic stupidity." Lieutenant Mavis stepped into view beside Blackwell, still wearing her Tozaran uniform, but with the Imperial insignia removed. "Lieutenant?" Dravik's voice cracked with disbelief. "You've defected." "I've recognized reality," Mavis corrected. "As your tactical analyst, I'm telling you that further resistance is pointless." Dravik's face contorted with rage. "Traitor. You conspired with them all along." "No," Mavis shook her head. "I simply observed what you refused to see. You kept dismissing my analyses because they didn't match your preconceptions." The screen split to show real-time footage of the human forces surrounding the base. But what Dravik saw made no sense. Among the makeshift weapons and repurposed Tozaran technology were machines of clearly human-designed sleek aircraft hovering silently, armored vehicles with unfamiliar configurations, energy weapons that looked nothing like Tozaran technology. What is this?" he stammered. "What you never bothered to look for," Blackwell answered. "Did you truly believe a species that progressed from primitive tools to space flight in a few thousand years would be so easy to defeat?" Mavis stepped closer to the camera. "They hid their advanced military technology, Commander. When your initial scans detected only their conventional forces, you assumed that was all they had. But they've been developing quantum technology, gravitational manipulation, and energy weapons for decades in secret facilities deep underground, shielded from detection." "Impossible," Dravik whispered, but his denial lacked conviction. "We anticipated invasion," Blackwell explained. "Not specifically from your species, but we knew someone would come eventually. So we maintained a public face of relatively primitive military technology while developing our real defenses in secret." The footage showed massive hangar doors opening in mountainsides, revealing squadrons of advanced aircraft. Underground silos revealed missiles unlike anything in Dravik's intelligence files. And from the oceans rose submersible craft that made Tozaran marine vehicles look primitive by comparison. "When you attacked, Blackwell continued, we made a tactical decision. Rather than revealing our full capabilities immediately, we allowed you to believe you'd won easily. It gave us time to study your technology, analyze your weaknesses, and prepare a coordinated global response. Mavis nodded. The data I collected for you was accurate, Commander. You just refused to accept the implications. Dravik slumped into his command chair, the full magnitude of his failure crashing down upon him. Everything from the too easy initial victory to the seemingly disorganized resistance had been orchestrated to lead to this moment. Outside the compound, the war drums began again. But this time, they didn't build gradually. They exploded into a thunderous, synchronized beat that seemed to shake the very mountain. The vibrations rattled equipment, cracked view screens, and sent tremors through the floor. You have 1 hour to decide, Blackwell said over the deafening percussion. Accept our terms, or we demonstrate what those drums have been preparing for the past week. After the transmission ended, Commander Dravik approached cautiously. Sir? Your orders? Dravik stared at the tactical display, showing the overwhelming human forces surrounding them. Not just repurposed Tozaran technology, but humanity's own secretly developed weapons. Not just soldiers, but farmers, teachers, children, and entire species united against his forces. We never stood a chance, he realized aloud. From the moment we arrived, they were playing us like he searched for the human expression, like a drum. He looked up at his remaining officers, seeing in their eyes what he had refused to acknowledge for weeks: defeat. Prepare for evacuation, he ordered quietly. Accept their terms. As the Tozaran troops gathered their meager remaining supplies and prepared to leave Earth forever, Dravik took one last look at the tactical display. The humans had already begun dismantling Tozaran installations, repurposing the technology, learning, adapting. The war drums continued their victory cadence, no longer a threat, but a celebration. And in that persistent rhythm, Dravik finally understood what Lieutenant Mavis had tried to tell him from the beginning. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been their technology or their numbers. It had been their adaptability, their creativity, and their absolute refusal to accept defeat. The last Tozaran transport lifted off from Earth's surface exactly 52 days after the invasion began. From the viewport, Dravik watched the blue-green planet recede, its continent still bearing the scars of battle. Scattered fires burned where major confrontations had occurred, but already he could see the humans rebuilding, swarming over captured Tozaran technology like industrious insects. In the atmosphere behind them, newly revealed human spacecraft took up escort positions, ensuring the Tozaran retreat proceeded as negotiated. The ships were elegant, powerful, and completely unfamiliar, not copied from Tozaran designs, but developed independently in secret Earth facilities. The treaty terms are generous, all things considered, Mavis remarked from beside him. She had chosen to remain with her people, but had been granted permission to accompany Dravik on this final departure. They could have demanded much more. They took everything that matters, Dravik replied bitterly. Our dignity, our reputation, the myth of our invincibility. They took knowledge, Mavis corrected, and gave knowledge in return. A fair exchange. As Earth diminished to a bright blue dot, something remarkable happened. The war drums, which had maintained their victory beat throughout the evacuation, finally stopped. The sudden silence felt profound, almost sacred. Why now? Dravik wondered aloud. Why stop the drums now? Mavis smiled faintly. Because their message is complete. What message? That humanity is not to be trifled with. That Earth is now a known quantity in galactic affairs. She gestured to the communication array, where data from the treaty negotiations was still displayed. They've announced their presence to the wider galaxy in the most effective way possible by defeating the supposedly undefeatable Tozaran Empire. Dravik turned away from the viewport, unable to watch any longer. The Supreme Overlord will have me executed for this failure. Perhaps, Mavis acknowledged. Or perhaps the Overlord will recognize the same truth you've been forced to learn, that some species are best left alone or approached as equals. The ship's FTL drive engaged, stars blurring around them as they prepared to return to Tozaran space. Before the jump completed, Mavis placed a small device on the console between them. "What is that?" Dravik asked. "A gift from General Blackwell." She called it a parting insight. The device projected a holographic display, ancient human cave paintings showing primitive humans surrounding their prey. In each image, some humans carried spears while others carried drums. "I don't understand," Dravik admitted. "Those drums we heard," Mavis explained, her voice taking on an almost reverent quality, "weren't just a modern psychological tactic. They're part of humanity's oldest hunting strategy. From their earliest days, humans have been pack hunters. The drums were used to flush out prey, to drive them into ambushes, to coordinate hunters over distances." She met Dravik's gaze with sudden intensity. "We were never the hunters here, Commander. From the moment we arrived, we were the prey." As the stars streaked past and Earth vanished behind them, Dravik finally understood the true irony of his defeat. The Tozaran Empire had spent centuries perfecting the art of conquest, developing technology specifically for subjugating other species. Humans had spent millennia perfecting something much more fundamental: survival.